What would you do if someone you trusted started using your kindness as an excuse to hurt you? I often asked myself this question, but I never had the courage to answer it. My story began in a quiet office near the sea, where I worked as a marketing assistant. The building was small and full of light. From my desk, I could see people walking near the water every morning. I liked the sound of the waves outside the window. It made me feel calm, even when everything inside felt heavy. When I first met Daniel, my new manager, I thought he was the kind of person who made life brighter. He spoke kindly to everyone, and people seemed to admire him. I remember thinking that he saw something good in me when he asked for my help on his projects. He often said, "You understand things without words." It made me feel proud. I started to believe that I was finally becoming someone important at work. I spent extra hours in the office, finishing his reports and editing his presentations. He would thank me with a smile, and that was enough for me then. After some time, Daniel began asking for help on personal tasks. He wanted me to organize his travel plans, write birthday messages for clients, and even choose gifts for his friends. I did not mind at first. I told myself it was part of learning. I wanted to grow, and I thought helping him was a good way to do that. What I did not see then was how slowly my time stopped being my own. Before we continue, I would love to know, where are you listening from? Which city or country? Share it in the comments. And if you are enjoying this story, please subscribe. I worked quietly beside him for months. Every morning, I arrived early and left when the office was empty. When other people left in the cafeteria, I stayed at my desk. Daniel started to depend on me for everything. He said he needed me because I was calm and patient. He said I was not like the others who always argued. Those words used to make me happy, but later they began to sound like a warning. Being quiet made my life easier, but it also made me invisible. The first time I realized something was wrong was on a Thursday evening. Daniel had promised to include my name in a big presentation for a new client. I had done most of the research, and my ideas were in every part of it. When the day came, he presented everything as his own work. My name was not on the slides. He did not even look at me when the team clapped. I told myself it was a mistake, but deep inside I knew it was not. I tried to speak with him later that day. I said that I had worked very hard and that I was disappointed my name was missing. He smiled and said, "You know how these things work. We are a team." Then he added, "You are good because you don't make problems." That sentence stayed in my head all night. You don't make problems. It sounded more like an order than a compliment. The days after that felt strange. My silence became a habit I could not escape. Whenever I wanted to speak, I remembered his face and the small, polite smile he used to end every argument before it began. My voice disappeared little by little. My coworkers started to believe that I was shy or weak. They stopped asking for my opinion in meetings. Even new interns spoke louder than I did. One afternoon, I overheard two people talking in the corridor. They said Daniel had received a big promotion. They said he was a great leader and that he built a strong team. My stomach felt tight. I wanted to run to the window to breathe. That evening, I sat at my desk long after everyone had gone home. I stared at the computer screen, but all I saw was my reflection. I looked tired. I looked smaller than I remembered. I asked myself if I had done this to myself. I started to notice other small things. Daniel had a way of talking that made people feel guilty, even when they did nothing wrong. When I forgot one small detail in an email, he would sigh and say, "I expected more from you." When something went right, he would say, "Good, that's what I hired you for." I realized he did not see me as a person anymore. I was only useful as long as I stayed quiet and worked hard. One morning, something changed. A new woman joined our office. Her name was Sarah, and she was confident and kind. During her first week, she asked me many questions about my work. I tried to answer carefully, but she quickly saw how much I did for Daniel. One afternoon, she said, "You do too much. He should be giving you credit." Her words made me uncomfortable because they were true. For the first time, I saw my situation from the outside. Sarah spoke her mind in meetings. She gave her ideas and sometimes disagreed with Daniel. I waited to see what would happen. He didn't like it. He started giving her fewer projects and shorter deadlines. I could see him slowly trying to control her confidence. That was when I understood. It wasn't only me. It was his way of keeping power. A few days later, something small pushed me over the edge. I had written a report that the client loved. The email came directly to me, thanking me by name. Daniel saw it, and instead of being happy, he told me to delete the email and said he would respond himself. He said, "It looks better if it comes from me." I smiled politely, but my chest felt heavy. That night, I walked by the water before going home. The sea was quiet, and the sky looked endless. I asked myself, when did I stop being proud of who I am? That night, I could not sleep. I kept hearing his voice telling me I was only valuable when I was silent. I thought about all the times I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. I thought about the person I used to be before I met him, someone who believed in fairness and hard work. I had become someone who waited for permission to be seen. That thought hurt me deeply. The next morning, I made a decision. It was not a big plan or a dramatic idea. It was something simple. I decided to speak. During the weekly meeting, Daniel started to explain a new project that I had prepared. As he spoke, I raised my hand. Everyone looked at me. My voice shook a little, but I said, "Actually, that was my report. I did the research last week." The room went silent. Daniel froze for a moment. Then he forced a smile and said, "Yes, she helped with it." But people had already noticed the truth. After the meeting, Sarah smiled at me. "That was brave," she said quietly. I felt something inside me open, like a small window letting in fresh air. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Later that day, Daniel came to my desk. His tone was sharp. He said, "You should have spoken to me before saying that." I looked at him and said, "I did, many times. You didn't listen." He looked surprised, as if hearing my voice for the first time. I packed my things slowly and said, "I think I have done enough here." When I walked out of that office, I did not have a plan. I did not know what job would come next or how I would manage, but I felt something I had not felt in a long time: peace. Silence did not belong to him anymore. It belonged to me. As I walked along the coast, I thought about all the times I had confused silence with peace. I realized that real peace does not come from keeping quiet. It comes from knowing your worth, even when others do not see it. And that was the beginning of my new life, the day I stopped being invisible. The morning after I left the office, I woke up with a strange mix of fear and freedom. I had no plan and no promise waiting for me. The world outside felt new, but also uncertain. For the first time in years, I did not have to answer anyone's emails or carry someone else's work. My phone was silent, and I sat by the window for hours, listening to the city waking up. It was strange to realize that I could breathe slowly again. For the first few days, I walked near the coast every morning. The air smelled of salt and coffee from small cafes that opened early. I often sat by the same bench, watching people pass by with their busy faces. They all seemed to know where they were going. I did not. I only knew that I could not return to the life I had before. My body felt lighter, but my thoughts were still full of questions. What if I had made a mistake? What if no one else hired me? What if I was not strong enough to start again? To calm myself, I began writing small notes in a notebook I bought from a street shop. Each page was a place where I could put my feelings without being judged. At first, I wrote about Daniel and the office. I wrote about the days stayed late and the nights I cried quietly at home. I wrote about how silence can feel safe, but also painful. After a few pages, something changed. My writing stopped being about him. It became about me. I began to write about the things I wanted to learn. I wanted to take a small design course and maybe try freelance work. I wanted to do something that made me feel creative again. I remembered how much I loved drawing as a child. My father used to say that when I drew, I looked like I was dreaming with open eyes. I had not drawn in years. That evening, I took an old pencil and a sheet of paper. My hand moved slowly, but the moment the lines began to appear, I felt a quiet joy. The next week, I saw an online advertisement for a short course in visual marketing at a local community center. It was not expensive, and the classes were small. I decided to join. On my first day, I felt nervous, like a student again. The room was full of people of different ages. Some were younger, some were my age, and one woman looked even older than my mother. The teacher, Mrs. Collins, smiled at everyone and said, "Here, we learn by trying, not by being perfect." Her words were warm, and I felt safe immediately. Each lesson reminded me that I still had ideas, and they were worth something. We worked on small creative projects like posters and digital ads. My classmates often asked for my opinion, and I was surprised at how easily I shared my thoughts. Nobody interrupted me or took my ideas. It felt natural to speak again. I realized how much confidence had been taken from me and how slowly I was gaining it back. One afternoon, while we were working in pairs, a man named Michael sat beside me. He was quiet at first, focused on his computer. Later, he looked at my design and said, "You have a good eye for balance." It was a simple sentence, but it stayed with me. He did not say it to be nice. He said it because he meant it. We began talking about work, about art, and later about life. He had left a corporate job a year before because of stress. "I forgot who I was," he said. I understood him completely. We started having coffee after class. He often brought small sketchbooks, and we shared ideas. He never asked about my past, and I liked that. It felt like we were both building something new, not repairing something broken. One evening, as we walked along the pier, I told him about the sea view from my old office and how it used to make me feel calm. He said, "Maybe it was trying to remind you that you belong outside those walls." His words made me smile. At home, I began sleeping better. My silence no longer felt like a prison. It became a choice. a moment of peace before each new day. I continued writing in my notebook, but now my words were different. I wrote about what I learned in class, what I felt when I walked by the sea, and how proud I was for Hot speaking up that day in the meeting. Sometimes I still heard Daniel's voice in my head, but it was no longer strong. It sounded far away, like an old memory fading slowly. After 2 months, Mrs. Collins announced a small design competition at the community center. The task was to create a poster for a charity event that helped local women find work. The moment I heard it, I knew I wanted to take part. The theme was strength in silence. It felt like it was written for me. I spent days working on my idea. I drew a woman standing near the sea, her hair moving in the wind. Around her, waves formed soft shapes of words: calm, power, courage, peace. When I presented my poster to the group, I felt nervous. My hands shook slightly, but I spoke clearly. I explained that silence was not weakness. It was often the start of strength. The class clapped, and Mrs. Collins smiled. "Beautiful message," she said, and beautifully said. That evening, when I walked home, I cried a little, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release. I had found my voice again. A week later, I received an email saying I had won second place in the competition. The message also said that a small magazine wanted to feature my design and interview me about my story. I read the email twice because I could not believe it. I sat in silence, holding the phone in my hand, and smiled to myself. For the first time, my silence meant peace, not fear. When the interview was published, one line stood out to me. The journalist wrote, "Her strength came from quiet persistence." I had never seen myself like that before. I used to think strength meant loud words and fast decisions, but now I knew it could also mean patience, kindness, and the courage to walk away when needed. A few days later, something unexpected happened. I received a message from an unknown number. It was Daniel. He wrote, "I saw the article. Congratulations, you've done well. Maybe we could talk." I stared at the message for a long time. The old version of me would have answered politely, maybe even agreed to meet. But this time I simply deleted it. I did not feel angry or proud. I felt nothing. That was how I knew I was free. Michael later helped me create a small online page where I could show my designs. He said, "Your story makes your art powerful." Soon, small local businesses began asking me for help with their ads and posters. It was not a lot of money, but it was honest work, and it was mine. I made my own schedule. I worked by the sea whenever the weather was good. My office was now the open air, with seagulls above and the smell of coffee around me. Sometimes I passed by my old building. I would see people rushing in and out, holding phones and folders. I wondered if they ever looked out the window and saw the same view I used to see. The sea was still there, calm and endless. It reminded me that life outside the office walls was wide and open. One afternoon, while walking home, I stopped at a bookstore near the corner. There was a card on the wall that said, "Writers Club, share your story." For a moment, I stood there thinking. I took one of the small cards and wrote my name and number. That night, I received an email from the club inviting me to read something at their next meeting. I smiled because I already knew what I wanted to share, the story of how silence can become strength. On the day of the meeting, I wore a simple white shirt and jeans. I was not nervous this time. When it was my turn, I stood in front of the group and read a short piece I had written. I said, "For a long time, I stayed quiet because I thought silence kept me safe. But I learned that when silence hides truth, it becomes a cage. When silence carries peace, it becomes a choice." When I looked up, people were clapping softly. Some were smiling, and one woman wiped her eyes. In that moment, I felt completely alive. After the meeting, a young woman came to me and said, "Your story helped me. I am going through something similar at work." Her eyes were full of hope. I touched her arm gently and said, "You already have the strength you need. You just have to use it." I meant it. That night, I walked home slowly under the streetlights. The city was quiet but not empty. I thought about how strange life can be. The same silence that once made me small now made me strong. I was no longer afraid of quiet rooms or soft voices. I had learned that real power does not come from shouting or winning arguments. It comes from knowing who you are and standing firm when others doubt you. As I reached home, I looked at the sea one last time before going inside. The waves were calm, moving like they had always done. I realized that I no longer needed anyone to see my worth. I saw it clearly myself. My silence was no longer weakness. It was my peace, my strength, and my voice. Months passed after that night at the Writers' Club, and my life settled into a gentle rhythm. I woke up early each morning and opened my window to let in the sea breeze. The sound of waves had become part of my days, like a friend reminding me to stay calm. My small design projects were growing slowly, and I had a few regular clients who trusted my work. Some days I still felt unsure about the future, but those thoughts didn't scare me anymore. I had learned that uncertainty was not failure. It was simply space for new beginnings. Michael and I continued to meet sometimes for coffee. We talked about art, work, and small things like the color of the sky or a funny sign we saw on the street. There was something simple and peaceful about his company. He never made me feel small. He never tried to speak over me or change my ideas. Sometimes, when I was quiet, he stayed quiet too. It was a silence that felt kind, not heavy. I began to understand that the right people never ask you to prove your worth. They see it already. One afternoon, I received a message from Mrs. Collins, my teacher from the community center. She invited me to help her with a small weekend workshop for new students. "You have a calm voice that people listen to," she wrote. I smiled when I read that. It was strange how the same words that once sounded like weakness now sounded like strength. I accepted her offer and spent the next weekend helping others learn simple design tools. When I spoke, people listened. They asked questions, and I answered with confidence. By the end of the class, I felt proud of myself. Mrs. Collins said, "You have a gift for teaching." For the first time, I believed her. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. My phone rang, and when I answered, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in almost a year. "Hello, Lena," the voice said. It was Daniel. For a moment, I froze. He sounded calm, almost friendly. "I got your number from an old contact," he continued. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to talk." My heart began to race. I didn't know what to say. Finally, I asked, "Why?" He said he wanted to apologize and maybe meet for coffee. I told him I would think about it, then hung up. I sat in silence for a long time after that call. The sea outside was moving softly, but inside me, everything felt unsettled again. I thought about how much had changed. I was not the same woman who once waited for him to notice her. I was stronger now, but I didn't want to test that strength too soon. I called Sarah, my old coworker, the only person from the office I still spoke to. When I told her about the call, she said, "If you meet him, do it for closure, not for answers. You already know who he is." Her advice stayed with me. 2 days later, I agreed to meet Daniel at a small cafe near the main street. It was the same cafe I used to pass on my way to the office. When I walked in, he was already there. He looked different, older, thinner, and less confident. He stood up quickly when he saw me and smiled like we were old friends. "You look great," he said. I nodded politely and sat down. For a moment, we said nothing. Then he began talking about work, about how busy things had been, and how the company wasn't the same without me. His words felt strange, as if he were trying to rewrite the past. Finally, he said, "I wanted to say I'm sorry. I treated you badly. I know that now." I looked at him carefully. His eyes were tired, and his voice was lower than before. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe he was just lonely. I didn't know. I said, "Thank you for saying that." He seemed surprised by how calm I was. "You're not angry?" Hatao asked. I smiled a little and said, "I was angry for a long time, but anger doesn't build anything. I moved on." He nodded slowly, looking down at his cup. Then he said something that made me realize why he had called. "You know, there's a position open in our new office. You are one of the best. If you want, I can recommend you." I looked out the window, then back at him. I saw the same pattern repeating, the same gentle tone, the same hidden control. He still thought I needed him. I said softly, "I appreciate the offer, but I have my own work now." His smile faded a little. "You're doing freelance?" he asked, as if it was something small. "Yes," I said, "and I love it." For a moment, he looked like he didn't understand. "You could have more," he said. "More money, more security." I shook my head. "I have peace," I said quietly. "That's more than I ever had there." He didn't reply. The silence between us felt heavy, but this time it was not mine to carry. When I stood up to leave, he said, "You've changed." I turned to him and said, "No, I just stopped letting others decide who I am." Then I walked out. Outside, the air felt fresh and clean. The sun was bright, and I could hear the sound of waves in the distance. I felt a deep calm in my chest, the kind that comes when you finally let go of the past. As I walked home, I realized that meeting him had been important. Not because I needed to hear his apology, but because I needed to see how far I had come. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. I wrote, "Silence can be a wound or a weapon. It depends on who controls it." I smiled at that line because it felt true. I had learned to use my silence differently, not to hide, but to protect my peace. I had turned something that once held me down into something that lifted me up. Weeks later, I was invited to speak at the same charity event that had used my poster design. The theme that year was finding strength in change. They wanted me to share my personal journey. When I stood on the stage, the lights were bright and the audience waited quietly. I took a deep breath and began to speak. "There was a time when I thought silence was safety," I said. "But safety without respect is not peace. I learned that my voice has value, even when it shakes." The room stayed still as I continued. I told them about the office, the long nights, and the day I finally spoke up. I saw people nodding and some smiling with tears in their eyes. After the talk, A few people came to me and said my words helped them see their own stories more clearly. One young man said, "I kept quiet in my job too. Tomorrow I will speak." Hearing that made everything worth it. I realized that every small act of courage becomes part of something bigger when shared. My silence had once been a wall, but now it was a bridge, a way for others to cross into their own strength. Later that evening, I walked by the coast again. The sea was silver under the moonlight, and the air was cool. I thought about everything that had happened, the pain, the fear, the lessons. I no longer saw my past as something to escape from. It had shaped me, taught me what I needed to learn. I whispered to myself, "Thank you," though I wasn't sure if I was thanking life, the sea, or my younger self for surviving it all. Michael called that night. He said he had seen a photo of me speaking at the event. "You looked strong," he said. "Not loud, not proud, strong." I laughed softly. "That's enough for me," I said. We talked for a while about our projects and small dreams. Before we hung up, he said, "I hope you keep telling your stories. I promised I would." Months later, I published a small collection of short pieces online. I titled it "The Quiet Side of Strength." People began to read and share it. Some sent messages saying they felt seen. Every word I wrote was simple, but each one came from truth. I realized that I didn't need to shout to be heard. I just needed to speak with honesty. One afternoon, I went back to my old bench by the sea, the same one I used to sit on when I first left the office. The sun was warm and the waves were calm. I took out my notebook and wrote one last line. She mistook my silence for weakness, but silence was never my weakness. It was my beginning. I closed the notebook and smiled. The sea kept moving, quiet and endless. I watched it for a long time and felt completely at peace. The world was still full of noise, but inside me, there was only calm. My silence had become my strength, and my story had finally found its ending. If this story touched your heart, tell me what part spoke to you the most. Remember to subscribe, share, and comment. Your support helps me bring more emotional English stories.